Now we pass into a thorny forest thicket. The barrenness in this next place is emphasized by Dante. Its leaves were all brown, not green. Its branches knotted, not straight. With no fruit, just poisoned thorns. Here the wild harpies nest, chasers of the Trojans off the Strophides. So here Dante refers to Book 3 of Virgil's Aeneid. The Trojan fleet under Aeneas arrived at the island where the harpies ruled, and just when the Trojans were happy to have reached a place where they could refresh themselves with food and drink, they were quickly disheartened when harpies descended on their feast and ruined their meat. So, Virgil, in those passages, likened the harpies to barren creatures, virgin faces, but with wombs obscene, foul paunches, and with ordure still unclean, with claws for hands and looks forever lean. Shit-covered bird women with foul wombs, virgin faces covered in shit. Virgil, ever the pastoral poet who loves the secluded life of farm and hearth that he wrote about in the Georgics, links their virgin infertility with their unhygienic inhospitality. And so the harpies are perfect for those who have rejected hearth, home, and life. Here, in this region of hell, the harpies torment the suicides. Dante describes them here. Huge wings they have, human faces, clawed feet, big feathered bellies. Their moans fill the weird wood. So here the souls are trapped in these thorny bushes and trees, dead on the outside, but receptive to pain on the inside, as we learn when Virgil tells Dante, "Take a twig and snap it off from the branch. Your illusion will snap as well." So Dante obeys. "When I reach to pluck it, the trunk howls. Why pick on me? And now that it starts to bleed, it screams again. Why pick me? Haven't you a heart inside you?" Dante tries to help us understand what this looks and sounds like with these lines. "It's like you light a green stick at one end, the other whistles as the sap sputters out of it. So from where this was splintered, words and blood came. Terrified, I drop the twig and just stand." So the souls of the suicides become these trees. And this soul, who is identified for us, not by Dante, but by anyone who has connected the dots for themselves and annotated the poem. The guy's name is Pier della Vigna. And he tells how he was the notary for the Emperor Frederick II, who, by the way, we already know is in hell, in the hell of the heretics in Canto 10. And he says, "I'm the one who held both keys to the heart of Frederick." So to this guy, great authority was delegated as the bearer of the seal, able to give the emperor's yes or no, and he was accused by those who envied him. And he speaks of envy as "that bitch is always awake and snooping in Caesar's palace." The bitch represents envy here, and Caesar's palace is kind of a rhetorical device that refers to all royal courts. So he was determined treacherous, imprisoned, and while he was imprisoned, he dashed his spongy brains against the wall, as Boccaccio phrased it. He goes on to explain the mechanics of this unique section of hell as to how the soul becomes a tree. And here we go, starting on line 94. "When the desperate soul gets free from the body it rips itself from, Minos sends it through gate 7. It drops at random into this wood, so wherever chance catapults it, it germinates here like any seed. It becomes a sapling, then a tree, then the harpies browse its leaves, giving agony and vents for agony." So the first thing I want to mention about all this is that the soul itself never mentions its name. It never mentions its name, and none of the other souls call him by his name. You and I can just look at the footnote and see, oh, who's this guy? Oh, it's Pier della Vigna. Oh, okay. But the footnote wasn't always there, and Dante can't know that the footnote is going to be there. And Boccaccio didn't have a footnote when he read it, and he had no idea at first. Here's what Boccaccio writes. "Con men fatica se intenda questa sua circunlocuzione." Fatica means fatigue. It is with fatigue that we can figure out who the guy is. It wasn't obvious to Giovanni Boccaccio, who lived in the 14th century. Now, Boccaccio interprets della Vigna's unwillingness to state his name as a sense of arrogance attached to the soul. And that's good. That's how I want to look at it. that Pier della Vigna just assumed his own preeminence. But unfortunately, I feel like I must consider the possibility that it's actually just Dante's error and that he's been bailed out by the historians. He's been bailed out by the annotating academics. Otherwise, we'd have no clue who he's talking about. And that Dante has overestimated the staying power of Pier della Vigna's name. Boccaccio calls della Vigna a meraviglioso dittatore, a marvelous dictator. So Boccaccio doesn't think too highly of this guy. But since Dante does not seem to acknowledge any sin other than suicide, we must assess that suicide is his lone sin. It seems to me that there's a certain sense of pride that he attaches to Pier della Vigna that manifests when he takes his own life because he is unwilling to continue living without the privilege of his station. Let us consider what we're looking at overall in this passage. This passage that goes from line 55 all the way to line 78. Okay, this is the speech that Piero della Vigna gives. The speech involves an assertion of his own innocence as to the charges of treason against Frederick II and his acknowledgement that his suicide was wrong, right? Then it was to my soul's bitter taste to try to fly bitterness by dying and to sin against my sinless self. That's line 70 through 72. However, then he goes on, 73. But I swear by my recent roots that I never once broke fidelity to my Lord, so worthy of honor. And if either of you do return, comfort my memory laid low yet from the blows envy gave it. And as for Pier della Vigna's request that Dante comforts his memory that has been laid low by the blows of envy, there's no reason to doubt that that is not exactly what Dante's attempting to do here. This pretty much means that in Dante's opinion, being in hell doesn't mean a person shouldn't be fully honored on earth. What are we supposed to make of this? That Dante considers himself to be fulfilling this pledge to restore a reputation by describing his conversation with him in hell. Okay, that's just how Dante thinks. Yeah, as soon as I get back, I'll tell everyone you're in hell. That'll help you. I'll tell everyone to take your word for it because you swore by the roots of your hell tree that you're telling the truth. That'll fix everything. It sounds so dumb. I spent so long trying to figure out how Dante's not saying that. But that's what he's saying. What an idiot. I'll write a poem. Dear America, I went to hell and I met Richard Nixon. He swears he didn't order the Watergate break-in. He swore on the brimstone rod that was up his ass. He said, I swear on this rod up my ass in hell, I didn't order the Watergate break-in. That's what Dante's pulling. It's so annoying. Canto 7 was so genius. How is this canto so bad? If he's willing to question the guilt of Piero della Vigna, why can't he bring himself to question this incredibly suspicious suicide story where he supposedly bashed his head against the wall? This poet thinks he's the guy who is going to correct the people's fables. But we'll just leave the head bashing thing. That's not suspicious. Can you imagine a bunch of guards go in there, take Pier della Vigna, and slam his head against the wall, and maybe Frederick II walks in and says, what happened here? He did it to himself. I mean, he just went crazy and slammed his head against the wall. It's like the courtroom testimony of an Italian gangster. I don't know what to tell you. He's crazy. Well, that checks out with me. Best way to go as far as I'm concerned. It's like that scene in Alfred Hitchcock.
Well, if I was going to kill you, I wouldn't do a dumb thing like hitting you on the head. First of all, I don't like the fingerprint angle. Of course, I could always wear gloves. Press your hands against the pipe after you were dead and make you look like a suicide. Except it don't seem hardly likely that you'd beat yourself to death with a club.
So moving on from the conversation, this is what happens next. While we attended to the trunk, thinking he wanted to say more, we were startled by some noise, just like one hearing the hurry of the boar, and the hunt after it, with foliage rustled by the chase, and then 2 shot from our left, scratched and naked, racing so fast they broke any branch in their way. So 2 souls are being chased by hounds. Now Ellis calls them hunting dogs, Longfellow calls them she-mastiffs, and Hollander says the woods were thick with bitches, black and ravenous and swift. So feminine evil seems to lurk here in this wood. The harpies, the bitch of envy, and these she-dogs tracking down sinners. And with no regard for the souls in the trees, as we may notice, they broke any branch in their way. So returning to the Ellis translation, the soul who is running slower than the other tries to hide in a bush, which of course is a soul. And so the soul in the bush and the one being pursued are ripped up together by the dogs. They sink their teeth into him, the one hiding, ripping him apart, then go off with his poor limbs. Now we've discussed the theme of a man who becomes a meal elsewhere. So the soul is that of Giacomo da Santo Andrea, who the Ellis footnote says was executed in 1239 by Ezzelino III, the tyrant who we met in the previous canto, Canto 12. And there were tales going around that this guy Giacomo got his kicks out of setting fire to his own house and to other people's houses too. There are some interesting types in 13th century Italy. And Dante's last line of the canto seems to correlate the suicides with a certain anti-domesticity, bringing us back to what we said about the harpies. Giacomo declares, "I gibbeted myself on the premises," as in he hung himself in his own house. Longfellow gets it better here. "Of my own house I made myself a gibbet." So to conclude this canto, I'll add this. When I first read this, I thought it was sad that Dante had to include suicides in hell. It's a sad sin, indeed. But if we reflect on what is written here, we find that Dante has not placed truly sympathetic suicides here. I don't care about the tears. He could have placed Dido here, and he didn't. She was forgiven for her suicide. She killed herself over a love. He has chosen a king's chancellor who was too proud to go on living if he was disgraced. And he has chosen some guy who got his jollies out of burning down houses, his own and others. So he's choosing some particularly violent people to put here. It's not just life is hard so I hanged myself. We are in the violent circle for men who behave like beasts. You have to remember that. And what could have fit that better than Pier della Vigna smashing his own head against a wall to kill himself? Time to move on to Canto 14.